help the NCAA in hopes of currying favor with them, in my opinion, rather than standing up for their own students, even to the point that the University of North Carolina has an honor code, which every person who enters as far back as when Bob and I were there has to sign and say, I agree to abide by this. That honor code gives you certain rights, the right to a presumption of innocence, the right to have your case investigated and heard before the honor court. But a student athlete can be deprived of his or her right to participate in intercollegiate sports with no action by the honor code. In our opinion, the honor code either means something or it's a scrap of paper, and if the university doesn't have to abide by its obligation under that, then how can they hold it against students? Final point, just a little anecdote. And I think this really goes to what I would characterize, Marsha, I'm not a theologian like you, but as a basic immorality of the system. Little story. After our client was declared permanently ineligible and we were unable to get an injunction allowing him to play a senior year, we hustled around and on the very last day got him eligible for the supplemental draft. He wasn't drafted, but he did in fact catch on with the Ravens, made the 53-man roster on injured reserve. An amazing accomplishment with the 9 days practice or 9 days in camp. But when we were trying to give him some exposure to NFL prospects, it was a pro timing day, coach coming up in Chapel Hill. The scouts were all going to be there from a dozen or more teams, several of whom were interested in him. It would cost the university nothing to allow him to come to the university track, the university gym, the facilities, and work out for the scouts like the rest of the guys. So we asked them, can he do that? Answer, if you will drop your lawsuit against the NCAA and us. Otherwise, he's not welcome here. Wow. So we scrambled around to get him a high school facility that he could work out at. To me, Marsha, that is a basic failure of the university to live up to its obligations to put its students first.
Look, Mr. Moderator, if I could follow up on that.
I'm up here
Yes, I think you're on to kind of another layer there, and the question that I would raise is, who is the University of North Carolina? Is it Chancellor Holden Thorpe? Is it Dickie Bedour? Is it Butch Davis? Is it Deontay Williams? Who is the University of North Carolina? When I hear, this talk about, well, the university, they went to bat for some of these guys. Who did? Who did? Butch Davis tried, he got fired. John Shoup tried, he got fired. Dickie Bedour tried, and he had to take an early retirement. So who is the University of North Carolina? Who is it? And that's what takes us back to this question of power and privilege. If everybody has a voice at the table that they have an investment in, this community, this would not have gone the way it did. People would have had advocates. People would have known the full story. There would have been a will to get the most information that we can get. But instead, the will was to protect the way things work at the University of North Carolina.
And I think that speaks to, it's not just a UNC issue, but just a general attitude about athletes. Because we know the student-athlete term is done legally so they can avoid having to pay workman's compensation in case anything ever happens, right? But we're not talking about students. At least athletes, as things are now, are not considered to be students. They're not treated as students. They never have been. Carolina's an interesting place where you can show me the football team or athletics, whatever it is. I can tell you what just about everybody majors in, and if they're smart, I can tell you what they major in. Like, that's how we've seen this, everything goes. They're not actually treated as students. And to be honest with you, there's no way to be a student and hold up the time demands that you typically have to deal with as an athlete, right? So if you stop looking at these as students and start looking at them purely as athletes, it becomes very easy to see that the university has no interest in these guys other than what they can do for them. Because by and large, what percentage of any of these rosters are guys that wouldn't be in this school otherwise if they could not play ball? And they're not integrated. Say it again. I would say probably something around 70 to 75. And that's not to say that they're incapable. I'm saying that the school wouldn't have a great deal of interest in them. UNC is a weird thing because of the county quota and everything else. They do a better job of diversifying the student body than other places. But these cats are here to play football. So then once something happened that got in the way of their ability to play football, it doesn't matter. And I think that's big to mention when we talk about power and privilege is also the science of integration, where integration in the United States is only taking place up to the requisite level that is required to either shut somebody up or achieve some sort of goal. So the football players are here to play football, but they're not actually integrated into the student body. They're not. I was an economics TA when I was a grad student at Carolina. And our big thing in our first meeting was, man, what are we going to do if we get a football player? Because we don't want to get caught in the drama of something happening. Then we looked around and realized, don't take economics. We had two of them. One of them was a walk-on. There's the one smart football major, management society, you might get somebody taking economics. But we realized very quickly, we weren't getting anybody that was taking economics. They're not integrated into the student body. So then when everything happens and it's time to shut them off, it's easy for everybody to shut them off. It's easy for fans because fans are looking at them as the only reason that you guys are in school in the first place is to play football. It's easy for administrative and faculty people to shut them off because faculty people are offended by the idea that these guys have been admitted into an institution of higher learning without actually being students. Everything there happens because college sports do not integrate athletes into the student body, which has part to do with race and part to do with everything else. But if we were talking about actual real life students who were interacting with the other students who were having meaningful interactions with their professors, then none of this happens because then everybody jumps up. Instead, you go on campus at noon, you go to the wall, you see the football players, right, and you see the chicks that's trying to be around them, and they're there by themselves. That's pretty much it. Like you talk to women that go to school at a big time place, they'll be friends with football players. Oh, they know this. Football players hang out with each other because the only people for a lot of them that are anything like them are the dudes on the team. So if you come from the projects or somewhere like that and you go to UNC, who are you going to hang out with? You find the girls from the other side of the tracks that go to school all hang out with the football players because that's the people that they can relate to, and then these guys are not brought in. So then once it's all said and done, this whole thing in it, it was nothing for everybody to say, well, that's what these guys are doing, they're this, they're that, da-da-da-da, what sort of guys and everything else. You got to know where these guys come from and everything else because that's the other part. Even when people want to defend athletes, it's in the context that they don't know any better because of where they happen to come from. But if people actually if there's a real live integration of the athlete into the student body, then you don't have this problem. The other thing is if you integrate the athlete into the student body, it's a whole lot harder to trick them because they're actually reading and learning and studying and all of these things, right? But what's the NCAA get out of kids that can read? Really, what benefit do they have out of players that actually can think for themselves? None.
The one thing that I did want to say is for Justice Soar is that, one of the things I think when we hear about integrating student athletes into the larger population, sometimes folks might make the assumption that, well, they can't be integrated. But I think that one of the realities is with the schedule, the student athletes have to keep up with. We talk about a very physical sport like football, with the injuries. I played baseball, and sometimes it was hard for me to get up some days to go to class, and then this opportunity. I mean, when you talk about meetings, when you talk about travel, when you talk about having study time, unless there's a concerted effort made by athletic coaches and administrators to integrate student athletes into everything that's going on, it's very difficult to do, whether they want to do it or not. Yes, sir.
I got 3 points. One, Devin did take economics because that's one of the questions in his interrogation. They said, well, do you use a tutor? He says, well, if I have a particularly tough course. And he says, well, what do you think is a tough course? He says, well, Econ 421. There was this sort of pregnant pause. You took Econ 421. Sort of that expectation that, you wouldn't do that. I had lunch a few weeks ago with a young woman who played one of the major sports in Carolina, female athlete. She was talking about, she was interested in going to law school, and she was talking about her grades weren't that good. And she says, I was putting in 25, 30 hours a week playing her sport and then gone missing numerous classes. And she was saying, I was just, my freshman year, I was just undone academically because of it, and indicated that the football players put in that much more. And so there is a large degree of hypocrisy when the universities say it's academics first. You can't spend 35, 40 hours a week in a major sport, miss classes because of travel time, and then expect to compete academically and have those opportunities. And to follow quickly on what Noah was talking about, because of the way the system works, the key is to get eligibility restored. And I think UNC got caught up in it. It's like copping a plea in district court. I'm going to cut a quick deal so that they'll let you back on the field here in 2 games or 3 games. And so the concept of guilt or innocence just never seemed to enter the process. It was all about how quickly can we get this player reinstated. And that's just a fundamentally flawed way of approaching it.
And that gets back to Bomani's point. If the university looks at our guys as not students but just players, that's what they're interested in, you know. So what if we take a chance and a guy admits to something that will be on his record forever if we can get him back after a couple of games?
Well, I'd also say this. This is when you talked about, how to handle it, because you mentioned Auburn. It was very interesting with the Cam Newton situation. We got 2 schools that fairly transparently committed NCAA violations, Auburn and Mississippi State, that somehow got to the point of discussing $180,000 but never did anything wrong. Because I know that when I'm not doing anything wrong, people always come to me and tell me they want to give me that they need $180,000 for something, right? That's always how it works when you do nothing wrong. Florida, where there's a legitimate question as to whether there was an information leak about academic information about Cam Newton, nobody got in trouble. Nobody came close to getting in trouble. They made Cam Newton ineligible one day. He was made eligible the next day. That's because everybody at the SEC said, hey, look, we got to come up with a plan. Mike Slide, I don't know how exactly it happened, but it takes a lot for everybody to get that all straight and nobody get in trouble. With everything that happened with Cam, nobody got in trouble. Now let's look at UNC, which has always held up its lack of violations and how it's never gotten in trouble and the pristine reputation that goes all the way down to the colors and everything else. They sold the boys out so quick because they somehow thought, if we can protect we got a reputation to protect, and maybe we can hold out at the end of the day about this reputation, and the kids wind up being collateral damage. We're the program of Dean Smith, like Carolina Wade type stuff.
The brand.
Yeah, the brand. And then they wound up on the back end where it just couldn't come through. And I always wonder what would have happened if this had gone down with the basketball program, because there's a lot more to lose. The football program goes away. I mean, it's a money issue, but if it goes away, it's no big deal. Hey, man, if we're talking about the basketball program, like if somebody would have gotten in the room and said, I'm going to just snitch on the basketball program, we'd have never heard from that person again. Never.
Sorry, Marshall.
Is that sort of the feeling, let's just go ahead and cop a plea and get this out of the way with some people? Is that?
Well, that's why I said we were tricked into telling the truth. After that day, it was apparent. I mean, some people, confessed, and those people didn't make the plane. Well, no one in that room made the plane, but those guys, they had a separate meeting. The day that we were supposed to load up and go down to LSU, Georgia Dome, it was 3 different groups, and depending on which group you got the same news. You know what I mean? So the first group that went, nah, y'all not gonna play. It's definite. See y'all later. The second group was, it may be y'all got to stay here. We have a private plane that'll fly y'all down there, or y'all drive, And the third group was y'all can play. So that was Bruce and Quan, those guys. But you just got to get reinstated, pay the money, and things of that nature. But you guys are making great points. I thought about the whole basketball thing too. It's hard not to. But in Devin's situation, I think that was a really, really great case because Devin did nothing wrong and was still kind of, had to go through all of that stuff. And the thing that I was more worried about is, like you said earlier, your legacy of what you leave behind. Forever, Marvin will be stuck with that title and that stigma, as well as everybody else that was there for that class. As much anticipation for that season that we had, now we're kind of stuck with that's the class that did this. You know what I mean? And that's what really sucks about everything.
I just wanted to nuance a little bit of what Bomani was saying about the the academics and their identity as athletes. I mean, the honest truth is these guys, their time is totally scheduled. And every night they're in study hall, every single night. They
I can
don't
change
have,
the schedule.
yeah. Their time is tight. And academics does matter because they want to be eligible to play. So it's not like they're just like, whatever, who cares about academics? That was not the atmosphere at all. The atmosphere was take care of your business. Take care of your business because that's the way you're going to help your team. And most of the guys did. They did take care of their business. And that's what made this all so heartbreaking. Someone like Devin's a good student. Devin's a good citizen. He's not just a fake student there. And a lot of these guys weren't that way. So I just want to nuance a little bit that while their status is different, the seriousness with which they went about their business, which included their classes, was palpable. It was there. And the other thing I want to say is that when I feel like things started to turn when the academic piece was out on the table and the university started looking a little soft. The Honor Council missed the plagiarism. University of North Carolina is starting to look like not such a good school. That's when the tide turned and we started hearing this language of we must protect our academic integrity. And then creating this dichotomy, which, again, I just want to nuance a little bit because I don't think it's as clear as some people say.
Well,
And the dynamic of academic integrity, I think, is interesting because the McAdoo case was kind of portrayed, I thought, in the news as if he had come up with what the hustle was for football players to get over. And the hustle is Julius Nyangoro. That was the whole thing. I went to dinner with some people that weekend. I think it was my birthday right when that happened. I went to dinner with some people. And we started talking about Nyangoro and what happened. Because I think it was Austin that was taking remedial reading, remedial writing or something, and taking a 400-level Nyangoro independent study that same semester. They're like, oh, man, what's this going on with the football players? And I'm sitting there with a table full of civilians, and they're all sitting there telling their stories about taking Nyangoro's independent study class. They show up. He comes in the first day. He tells you he's going to be gone all semester, and he walks out. That's it. Right? So, like, if your schedule's tight, it makes sense that that's a great class to take. But what was underscored, but nobody really talked about is this wasn't a Michael McAdoo hustle or anybody else. This is an everybody hustle. Everybody knew that this is the guy to go to if your schedule was tight, you talk to, and then you run it through. And then everything with Nyangoro was real quiet. Like, when they removed him from his chair position, somehow he'd been in the chair for almost 20 years, and he's gone all semester, every year. And it's somewhere, like, on the 4th or 5th page of the A section of the News and Observer that he's no longer in the chair. That's what I'm saying. Like, the student body and everybody figured out at the same time, but it was put on McAdoo as if it was some idea that he was this guy who just didn't want to find a way to get the work done. But there's a whole rampant thing that was going on, like the academic integrity part of it. Man, we got a cheating epidemic nationwide. I know I've taught the screw-ups. They come in, they cheat, you catch them, and you go. And it's not just players.
Yes, unfortunately, on both sides of it, I never took any of those courses. I enrolled in my class, and it's going to be right in the system. But this is fascinating. What I want to do is I want to open it up to our audience because I know we have some law students, we have some faculty in here, we have some folks from athletics, so I know there's a range of questions. But I'm going to go ahead and plant the seed now. I want to say when I come back, I want to ask you about how do we correct this moving forward? Meaning, what does due process mean? How do we ensure it, whether it's from a legal standpoint, a public policy standpoint, from the standpoint of the student athlete? I want to talk about that. But let's open up the floor to the audience. Any questions for our panel?
Taking it from a litigation standpoint, do you think that equal protection is probably the best way to avoid a national trend to protect these players? And if so, how does a rational basis possibly come into that?
Sure.
If it's applicable.
Sure. I'm glad you asked the question because I think it reminds me of something that I should have said earlier. The NCAA argues that playing intercollegiate sports is a privilege, not a right. And nobody has a right to be on the football team. Well, no one has a right necessarily to be in the Glee Club or the Valkyries or debate team, but in our view, any person who is qualified by his or her ability and hard work to earn a spot on any of those kind of organizations needs to have an equal opportunity to do so, and any deprivation of that needs to be related to not an arbitrary and capricious, but an actual justifiable reason to keep them off that. So I do think that we have an equal protection argument in our case, and I do not think, I'm not sure we can fit this legally into a suspect classification, but I think when someone's basic due process rights are violated, as in our case where the NCAA's own records show that they knew that the facts upon which they were acting were wrong, and they went ahead and went forward with it too. To me, even if we have to make an arbitrary and capricious case, I think we can meet that standard.
Before we go to our next question, I missed this sort of point. What was that process like when you're trying to let the CCA know this information that you have is incorrect? And here's some additional information, or here's some amended information. I remember the conversation with Devin's mom and with Justice Orr with regard to it's almost like they don't want to know.
Now, in our case, and this is nothing that isn't in the public record, but in our case, the chair of the committee that considered the reinstatement, and again, this is before we're involved in the case, our client had no representation at that time, although I think he assumed that the university lawyers were representing him. At that point, the hearing starts. The chair of the committee says, this is not a hearing about the facts. If the facts were in dispute at all, we would call the hearing off and go back to an investigation. And this is basically your opportunity to plea for leniency because you've admitted that you're guilty, and now this is your opportunity to tell us why you shouldn't get the capital punishment of permanent ineligibility. Representative of the university, to his credit, got up and said, that's not right. You've got your facts wrong. The honor court, since we made our initial finding, has acquitted the young man of some of the things that you're relying on. And so not only are the facts not undisputed, you've got the facts wrong. The chair of the committee then told him, your time's up, sorry, we've got to move along, went straight forward to complete the hearing and refused the reinstatement. It's the kind of procedure, Emmett, that any judge or lawyer would find to be just totally unacceptable from a due process standpoint. But then they fall back on the idea that, well, it's just a privilege, not a right. You don't have a right to play football. And in any event, you have no contract with the NCAA.
They get away with it because virtually every student athlete who has a legal issue can't get a Noah Huffstetler to represent him or her. And they will man up with enough lawyers to fill a coliseum. You know, the NCAA can afford to pay the biggest law firms in the country to fight, defend, and in those few circumstances, like in the Oliver case, where they get an adverse ruling, they then settled the case. They paid Oliver $750,000. He was a baseball player from Oklahoma State, I think. You know, and so you don't establish any case law, Brandon, you know, that can really help. And one of the great things about knowing his firm and the associates, they have put in hundreds and hundreds of hours on this case, and they're still fairly early in the process. But I hope Mike McAdoo keeps fighting because he got as raw a deal as anybody in the whole situation.
Anybody had an opportunity to see the hearing on WRAL? You were in their battle. You were in their battle. Next question.
I got to tell you a quick story about that. The only good thing that came out of that thing being televised was one of my young associates was there at council with me. And of course, the Pack Pride folks jumped all over this on their website. But there was a multi-page thread on Pack Pride on, quote, McAdoo's lawyer has a hot assistant. That was the only good thing about that hearing.
The NCAA case, settled, that fund is there. If you're an, you know about the white case?
No.
I'm saying that there's millions of dollars in funds that are available, but you don't hear about it. So, interesting point. I will go on, you know, because the national letter of intent, anybody know who that is administered by? It's called the Collegiate Commissioners Association. You know where their office is? SEC headquarters. The Associate Commissioner of the SEC is the facilitator of the CCA. National Letter of Intent. The NLI is administered out of the NCAA office. Student athlete statement, which athletes sign, contract with you, without a doubt, in my opinion. So athletes are fundamentally trained that this is how you respond. Because if you don't sign student athlete statement, what's the consequence? You know?
Can't play?
Tell you,
Can't play?
can't play. You are ineligible to play, but you're free not to sign it. So, you know, so my question to the panel, I guess structurally, we talk about student athletes, which is an arbitrary term that they brought up, that has been invented. Workers' compensation claim one that you talked about. How do you see this playing out among the general public? Because we're talking legal sense here, but the NCAA is not a state act. So how do you put that in context? I guess that's my question is when you look at it, the NCAA is not a state act. Tarkanian case proved that was the
5-4, but it needs to be reversed. Somebody needs to get one back up there.
So again, my point is how does this play out structurally, which goes to privilege and power?
I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you this in these terms. But the NCAA and its players and everybody have your basic pimp-prostitute relationship, right? One side's got one. Yeah, no, but you can say it, but when you really break it down, it becomes important because once you start talking about it, you don't have to sign this, but if you don't sign it, you can't play, right? So you say they got a bunch of money that players are supposed to have access to, because I've only learned about this recently, about the last year or so. Bunch of money that players have access to, except we don't tell you that you have the money. The only reason not to tell somebody that the money's not there is because you don't want them to have money. We hear every discussion about why players aren't paid because they can't afford it. No. There's no benefit to paying players if you're the NCAA. If you've seen the MAC, that keeps them broke. They wake up with some money, they're subject to go crazy. The one-year scholarship offer is entirely about preventing players from mobilizing and organizing. All of it is about creating this culture of dependency. The national letter of intent, which is the best part, because if you're any good, you don't need to sign a national letter of intent. That's the biggest thing about it. If you are marginal and you need to hold down your place, then you need to sign an LOI. I get that all day long. If you're one of the top 15, 20 players in the game, there's no purpose for you. They will hold your spot forever. Like they've gotten to the point where they've convinced people that National Signing Day is the last day to sign, as opposed to the first. And so everybody's running and jumping and do all these things. But once you look at it that way, we can say the NCAA is not a state actor. Whatever that means. You guys can put that in all your fancy jargon and everything else. But the reality is the entire system is set up to deprive the rights of players, make them dependent once they get there, and then sit them into a point where there's nothing that they can do. So then, like, for example, trying to go to the draft, you've got some advisory council you can go to, or you can go talk to your coach. Now, one thing about Butch Davis that drives me crazy, I always felt like somebody needed to snatch him up for, is his belief that you should not come out for the draft unless you're a top 5 pick. As I've been told, the only guy who's really recommended ever go to the draft was Edgerrin James. That's the only one, and that he was a top 5 pick. Now, that is patently ridiculous. If they're going to take you, you need to go. So with Little got drafted the same place he would have gotten the year before. Little need to go the year before because there's no telling what would have happened to him if he would have played. But who do you go